Eric had just $14.00, a broken-down truck, and 2 hungry kids waiting at home, when a stranger in a baseball cap asked if he was okay. He had no idea that man was Keanu Reeves, and what Keanu did next would not only change Eric's life, but rewrite everything he thought he knew about second chances. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The truck rattled as it limped into the gas station, its engine making a hollow clunk with every revolution. Eric Dawson gripped the wheel tighter, as if sheer willpower could hold the vehicle together. He coasted up to the nearest pump at Barstow's rundown Shell station, the kind with one flickering light and more broken pumps than working ones. The California desert sun bore down like a punishment, painting everything in washed-out yellows and grays. His shirt clung to his back, soaked through with sweat, and the truck's busted air conditioner offered no relief. He turned off the engine and leaned forward, resting his forehead against the steering wheel. The dashboard thermometer had blinked 104 DGF when he'd pulled in. A small, tattered box of crackers sat on the passenger seat. Dinner for tonight. Maybe breakfast, too, if he could stretch it. Eric reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. Inside, 2 crumpled $5 bills, 3 worn singles, and a handful of loose change stared back at him. He counted it again to be sure. $14.31. He closed his eyes, swallowing the lump in his throat. That money had to cover gas, possibly food, maybe something for the kids if there was anything left over. Lila and Ben had waited all afternoon for him to come back. He'd told them he'd try to pick up a delivery route, maybe snag a tip or two, but the truck had barely made it this far. He opened the door and stepped out into the oppressive heat. The asphalt felt soft beneath the soles of his sneakers, old running shoes that were now more hole than sole. The air shimmered like a mirage. Around him, the lot was nearly empty, save for a rusted pickup idling by the air pump and a lone motorcycle parked near the store entrance. Eric walked slowly toward the store, wiping sweat from his brow with his sleeve. His legs felt like concrete. Each step reminded him how little rest he'd had. Between gigs, side jobs, and worrying over bills, sleep had become a luxury. He hadn't had a full night's rest in weeks. Inside the truck, the radio had long since stopped working. The kids didn't even ask about music anymore. They'd just sit quietly, watching the desert roll past the windows. Too mature for their ages, too used to silence. As he reached the glass door of the station, he caught his reflection. The man staring back at him looked 10 years older than 38. Sunken eyes, uneven stubble, shoulders hunched with a weight no one else could see. He took a breath and stepped inside. The cool air hit him like a wave. For a moment he just stood there, letting the chill wash over his skin. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a pale glow on the dusty floor tiles. A teenage cashier sat behind the counter, eyes glued to a phone, earbuds in, oblivious. Eric headed toward the counter, then paused at the refrigerated section, eyes lingering on the cold drinks. Lila loved orange juice. Ben always asked for chocolate milk. He turned away. He approached the counter and laid down 2 crumpled 5s. 10 on pump 3, he said, his voice low and hoarse. The cashier didn't look up, just tapped a few buttons and mumbled, "You're good." Eric nodded and turned to leave. His stomach growled, but he ignored it. Hunger had become familiar, something he could manage as long as the kids had something to eat. Outside, the sun hit him again, wrapping around him like a suffocating blanket. He headed back to the truck and unscrewed the gas cap. $10. At nearly $4 a gallon, it wouldn't even get him 3 gallons, just enough to maybe pick up that delivery route and swing by the apartment, if the truck made it. He lifted the nozzle and began fueling. As the gas flowed, he heard the sound of a motorcycle pulling in behind him, the low hum of an engine, smooth and clean, not like his truck's cough and sputter. He turned slightly, half curious, and saw the rider dismount. Tall, black t-shirt, faded jeans, a plain gray helmet tucked under one arm. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, just calm. The man walked with the ease of someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He had a slight limp, barely noticeable unless you were looking, but something about him made Eric pause. He looked familiar, not in a "we've met before" kind of way. More like the way someone looks when you've seen them in a movie, or on a billboard, or maybe in a magazine that's 10 years old and folded under a couch cushion in a doctor's waiting room. Eric turned back to the pump. It clicked off with a hollow thunk. He hung the nozzle, twisted the cap shut, and gave the side of the truck a gentle pat. It was a habit by now. Half encouragement, half apology. He climbed back inside, sweat dripping down the back of his neck. The inside of the truck felt like an oven. The box of crackers had started to warp, the corners turning soggy from the heat. He pulled one out, bit into it, and nearly choked on the dryness. No water. He'd used the last of it that morning packing the kids' makeshift lunches. He glanced at the dashboard. The fuel needle had barely moved. Great. His eyes flicked to the convenience store. The man from the motorcycle was inside now, picking up a bottle of water and a sandwich from the fridge. Something about the way he moved, unhurried, purposeful, still tugged at Eric's mind. He shook his head and looked away. It didn't matter who the guy was. What mattered was that Eric had a deadline, a broken truck, and 2 kids counting on him. He reached for his phone, the screen cracked in the top corner. 1 bar of signal. A new message blinked on the screen. It was from Lila. "Ben says hi. We cleaned the kitchen. Can't wait for dinner. Love you, Dad." Eric exhaled slowly, the message both comforting and crushing. Dinner. He stared at the box of crackers again. Half empty. He'd promised them something better tonight. He'd said he'd figure it out. The truth was, he didn't have a plan anymore. The truck wheezed when he turned the key. It sputtered once, then caught, the engine rattling like it might fall apart if pushed. He threw it into gear and edged out of the station lot, passing the motorcycle on his way. The rider had taken off his cap now, and suddenly Eric knew. His heart skipped. That face. Calm, kind, weathered by time, but unmistakable. Keanu Reeves. He almost hit the brake but kept driving, unsure if his eyes were playing tricks on him. What would Keanu Reeves be doing at a gas station like this, out in the middle of nowhere? It didn't make sense. It couldn't be him, but he knew what he saw. The truck rattled as he pulled out onto the main road, his mind spinning faster than the engine. He'd admired Keanu since the Matrix days, a quiet kind of man, humble, gracious, never flashy, never Hollywood in the worst ways. If anyone would show up in a place like this on a beat-up motorcycle without fanfare, it would be him. Eric shook his head. No, it didn't matter. Famous or not, no one was coming to save him. He had a delivery to try and make. Gas to stretch, kids to feed, bills to avoid. The weight of it all settled again on his chest like a lead vest. He glanced in the mirror. The gas station was already disappearing behind him, swallowed by the shimmering desert heat. His gut clenched. Something about that moment didn't feel finished. Like a thread had been pulled, and the unraveling hadn't even started yet. The engine hiccuped again, this time louder. The rattle deepened into a knock. Eric reached for the volume knob, then remembered the radio didn't work, and dropped his hand. He didn't need music, not now. He needed a miracle, and he didn't believe in those anymore. The needle on the fuel gauge didn't budge. Eric sighed and pulled the truck back into the same gas station lot he had just left. The knocking in the engine had grown worse, and the transmission had started slipping on the uphill stretch. He didn't have the luxury of pushing this thing farther. If it died on the open road, he'd have no way to get help and no money to call for a tow. He parked away from the pumps, this time next to the faded air compressor unit, and grabbed the last 3 singles from his wallet along with a few quarters and dimes he'd scooped out of the cup holder. Maybe, if he walked inside and offered cash instead of a card, he could get something, anything, that would help hold the kids over until morning. Inside, the air conditioning was a blast of relief again, but Eric barely noticed it this time. His eyes darted immediately to the cold drinks at the back of the store. He walked down the aisle slowly, deliberately, counting change in one hand and trying not to think about the numbers. 3 singles. 73 cents. He stopped in front of a row of juice bottles. Lila's favorite was the orange mango blend, but even the small one was almost $4. He picked it up, stared at the label, then checked the price again. Nope, couldn't do it. Yeah. A smaller apple juice bottle on the next shelf down caught his eye. $2.29. He held it for a moment, imagining the way Ben's face would light up. Then he looked at the pile of coins in his hand. He hadn't eaten anything since yesterday afternoon. There was a stale bag of saltines in the truck, but nothing else. He stared at the juice a long time, then slowly, reluctantly, returned it to the shelf. There was no room for splurges, not even a bottle of juice for a child. He walked toward the front with just a single bottle of water and a small pack of peanut butter crackers. 2 items he hoped would look more like lunch than pity. The teenage cashier still hadn't moved from his stool. He glanced up lazily as Eric approached the counter. Behind him, the chime of the door rang again. Eric didn't turn to look. $2.79, the cashier said. Eric handed over the singles and began counting out coins with trembling fingers. A quarter, 2 dimes, 4 pennies. His fingers were sweaty, his pride even worse. Behind him, a calm voice spoke. "Take your time. We're not in a rush." Eric looked up slightly. The voice had a gentleness to it. Deep, warm, friendly, and it was familiar. He glanced over his shoulder. The man from earlier, the one with the motorcycle, was standing right behind him in line. The ball cap shadowed most of his face, but his presence was quiet and confident. He wore a plain black t-shirt, jeans, and a canvas messenger bag slung over one shoulder. Nothing about him screamed celebrity, but something in his eyes. It stirred a memory. "Hot day," the man said with a faint smile. "Feels more like we're standing in a furnace," Eric replied, trying to match the light tone, even as he handed over the last of his change and took the small bag from the counter. "Thanks for the patience. Been through Barstow before," the man said. "It always hits like a blow dryer this time of year." Eric gave a small nod and stepped aside to let him approach the counter. As he waited near the door, the man set down a bottle of water, a protein bar, and a pack of gum. The cashier looked up, suddenly more alert. He blinked, hesitated, then rang up the total. As the man paid with a crisp 20, Eric tried not to stare. Something about the interaction felt off, like the cashier had recognized him and was pretending not to. Or maybe Eric was just projecting. He started toward the door, then paused when he heard the man behind him speak again. "You work around here?" Eric turned halfway. "Not anymore." The man stepped up beside him, waiting to exit together. "Just curious, saw your shirt. Dawson Thermal Services? You a mechanic?" Eric glanced down. He hadn't even realized he was wearing the old work shirt. The logo had faded almost to nothing. "Used to be. Worked in thermal systems, mostly battery cooling and containment back in the day." "Back in the day?" the man repeated with a raised eyebrow. Eric laughed once, low and bitter. "Before the company downsized, before the layoffs. Now I do deliveries, gig apps, whatever pays." There was a pause. Not uncomfortable, just quiet. Then the man pushed open the door. Outside, the sun hadn't softened. The heat wrapped around them again like a wet towel. "You ever miss it?" the man asked as they walked toward the parking lot. Eric shrugged. "I try not to think about it. Doesn't pay the bills. Doesn't fix the truck. Doesn't buy dinner for 2 kids waiting at home. The man nodded slowly, thoughtfully. Still. Thermal systems, battery work. That's specialized. It used to be, Eric said, rubbing his neck. But now, it's just old knowledge nobody wants anymore. They reached the edge of the lot. Eric gestured toward his truck. That's me. The man followed his eyes. That thing looks like it's been through a war. You're not wrong. The man laughed lightly. I've owned worse. Eric doubted that, but he appreciated the sentiment. I should go, he said, starting to turn. Kids are expecting me. The man didn't stop him, but his next words made Eric pause. He said, battery cooling systems? Eric turned back. Yeah, he said, slower now. I worked on thermal regulation for lithium-ion arrays, trying to prevent overheating in extreme environments. Arizona's a good place to test that. The man tilted his head. You have any of that work left? Documents, designs, anything like that? Eric squinted at him. Why are you asking? The man gave a small smile. Just interested. I work in tech. Battery performance is always a conversation. Eric was suddenly self-conscious again, his sun-bleached shirt, his worn-out sneakers, the fact that he'd just scraped together change for a pack of crackers and a bottle of water. I've got a notebook, he said slowly, mostly old stuff, some ideas I kept working on after I got laid off. Not that it matters, nobody reads notebooks anymore. Maybe some people still do, the man replied. His tone was calm, sincere. Eric didn't know what to say to that. He glanced at the motorcycle parked across the lot. It was nice, sleek, custom, definitely not cheap. This guy clearly wasn't just another desert wanderer. What kind of tech do you work in? Eric asked cautiously. The man considered the question. Little of everything. Energy systems, transport, AI, some sustainability stuff lately. Eric stared. That mix of industries, that voice. His heart skipped again. Before he could stop himself, he asked, What's your name? The man hesitated. Then he said, John? Eric squinted. Just John? The man smiled again. Just for now. There was something playful in his answer, not mocking, just a shared joke, an inside truth not yet spoken. Eric didn't press. He wasn't sure he wanted to know. Or maybe he was afraid to be wrong. Well, John, he said, it was nice talking to you. Thanks for not rushing me back there. Of course, John replied. And hey, if you still have that notebook, maybe don't throw it away just yet. Eric gave a dry chuckle. That thing's the only reason I haven't lost my mind. Probably more napkin sketches than real science at this point. Sometimes napkin sketches change the world, the man said quietly. Eric nodded once, unsure how to reply. Then he turned, walked back to his truck, and climbed in. As the engine coughed back to life, he glanced one last time at the man now leaning against his bike, sipping from his water bottle. Just John, or maybe not. He pulled away, unsure why the weight in his chest felt just a little bit lighter. The apartment was quiet except for the steady ticking of the wall clock. A second-hand piece with a crooked frame, it ticked 5 minutes fast, which Lila had never told her dad. She liked that it gave them a little more time, even if only pretend. The living room was small, worn from years of careful living. One couch with a frayed armrest, a coffee table missing a leg and propped up by an old biology textbook, a mismatched rug underfoot that smelled faintly of detergent and old takeout. Lila Dawson, age 10, sat cross-legged on the floor with a stack of scrap paper and a dozen crayons. Her little brother Ben, age 7, leaned against her shoulder, coloring carefully within the lines of his own drawing. They were both barefoot, their feet dusty from the cracked tile that covered most of the apartment floor. We should add a treehouse, Ben said, holding up his sketch of their dream house. One with a secret ladder and, like, a telescope that pops out of the roof? Lila smiled. And a mailbox that only gets happy letters. Ben giggled at that. No bills. "Nope," she said. "Only birthday cards, and maybe pizza coupons." They both laughed quietly. Lila went back to her drawing, outlining the roof of the little house she'd been designing for weeks. It was a simple square house with a triangle roof, but today she added a little garden in the front and 2 stick figures. Her and Ben. Standing on the porch, smiling. She didn't draw their dad yet. Not until she knew for sure what kind of mood he'd be in tonight. "I'm hungry," Ben mumbled, laying his crayon down and rubbing his eyes. "Me too," Lila admitted. She didn't tell him that all they had in the cupboard was a half-empty box of saltines and some peanut butter that had gone stiff at the bottom of the jar. She'd tried to scrape enough out earlier for a few sandwiches, but the knife kept hitting plastic. "Dad'll be back soon," she said. "Maybe he got one of those delivery jobs." "Do you think he got pizza?" Ben asked hopefully. Lila hesitated. "Maybe," she said, trying to smile. "He said he'd try." Ben stood up and wandered into their bedroom. A minute later, he returned with his old mason jar. It had a faded label that read, "Dad's Dream Truck," written in his first-grade handwriting, the words slightly tilted and smudged from years of handling. "I found 2 more pennies under the couch," he said proudly. Lila watched as he dropped the coins into the jar with a soft clink. The sound echoed in the stillness. "Makes $2.91, he said. "We're almost there." Lila reached over and squeezed his hand. "We're getting close." Ben sat back down beside her, still holding the jar in his lap. "Do you think when we get the dream truck, it'll have air conditioning that doesn't make weird sounds?" "I think it'll be so cold inside we'll need sweaters," Lila said. "Even in summer?" "Especially in summer." He laughed again, the kind of laugh that only came when he felt safe. Lila held on to that sound like a secret. Their apartment's air conditioner rattled faintly from the hallway. It hadn't worked right in weeks. Their dad had tried to fix it 3 times already, but the parts were too expensive, and the maintenance guy for the building had stopped answering their calls months ago. There was a knock at the door, 2 soft taps, and a pause. Lila stood up quickly. "That's Mrs. Ramirez." She opened the door to find their elderly neighbor holding a small pot wrapped in a dish towel. "Hola, mijita," Mrs. Ramirez said with a kind smile. "I made too much soup." Ben perked up at the word soup. "Thank you, Mrs. Ramirez," Lila said, stepping aside to let her in. The older woman walked slowly, her knees stiff from age, and placed the pot on the stove. She opened the cupboard and pulled out their 2 chipped bowls, then began ladling the warm lentil soup like she'd done it 1,000 times. "I was just thinking about dinner," Ben said brightly. "Well, now you have some," Mrs. Ramirez replied. "And it's still hot." Lila set the table, 2 forks and 2 napkins, folding them neatly even though they weren't needed for soup. "Has your papa called?" the old woman asked gently. Lila shook her head. "Not yet. It'll probably got a big job tonight," Ben said confidently. "Maybe he's bringing ice cream, too." Mrs. Ramirez didn't correct him. She smiled and nodded. "That would be lovely." They sat at the table together, eating slowly. The soup was thin but warm, with just enough seasoning to remind Lila of better days. She watched Ben eat with his usual eagerness and felt grateful he didn't notice the things she did. The empty fridge, the stack of unpaid bills on the counter, the silence that stretched too long before their dad came home each night. After dinner, Mrs. Ramirez helped wash the dishes, her gnarled hands moving carefully. She dried them and placed them back in the cupboard, exactly where they'd been. "You both be good," she said. "I'll come check again in an hour." Lila nodded. "Thanks again." The door closed softly behind her. Ben returned to their shared bedroom, grabbing a blanket and dragging it out to the living room floor. "I want to sleep near the window," he said, "so I can see the stars." Lila didn't argue. She just tucked the blanket around him and sat beside him, watching the empty driveway through the blinds. "Is Dad late because of work?" Ben asked after a long silence. "Probably," Lila said, her voice calm. "You know how deliveries are. He gets stuck in traffic sometimes." Ben nodded sleepily, curling into the blanket. He always comes home. Lila didn't answer. She watched the parking lot below, where their dad's old truck was usually parked. The space looked emptier in the dark. She imagined it pulling in at any moment, headlights cutting across the lot, the engine coughing once before going silent. "I made something," Ben said suddenly, sitting up. He reached behind the couch and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. When he opened it, Lila saw a new drawing. Their dream house again. But this time it had a big garage and a tree with a tire swing. Standing in front of it were 3 stick figures: Dad, Lila, and Ben, all smiling. Above the house, he'd drawn stars and a crescent moon. "I think this is what it'll look like," Ben said proudly, "when we get it." Lila smiled, tracing the stars with her fingertip. "I hope so. We should put it on the dream board," Ben suggested. She nodded. "Let's do it in the morning, when Dad's back." Ben yawned and settled into his blanket. "He'll come back. He always does." Lila nodded again, not trusting her voice. She waited until he was asleep, then stood and walked to their small hallway closet. She reached up to the top shelf and pulled down a spiral notebook, its edges frayed and its cover smudged with graphite. It was their dad's. She'd found it a week ago while looking for tape to fix one of Ben's toys. She hadn't meant to read it, but the pages had pulled her in. Inside were diagrams. Complex ones, with arrows and numbers and tiny annotations she couldn't fully understand. But even at 10, Lila could tell this wasn't ordinary writing. These were ideas, inventions, plans. One page had a title: Ceramic Cooling Core, Gene 3 Testing Notes. Another page listed materials she didn't recognize. And on the last sheet was a yellow sticky note with one word written in bold capital letters: patent. She didn't know exactly what that meant, but it looked important, like something people made when they wanted to protect a good idea. Lila ran her hand gently over the page. Her dad wasn't just a delivery driver. He was something else, something she hadn't seen before. She looked back toward the couch where Ben slept peacefully, and then out the window at the still empty parking space. She didn't know where their dad was right now, but something in her chest told her this night would be different. The sun was sinking low when Eric pulled out of the gas station again, this time with barely enough fuel to make it across town. He'd accepted a small delivery job through an app, a courier drop-off that would earn him $12 if the client tipped. Not much, but maybe enough to pick up some eggs or bread before heading home. He did the math as he drove. Fuel left in the tank, distance to the delivery, whether he could squeeze in one more order after that before the engine finally gave out. The truck rattled hard every time he turned. The brakes were growing sluggish. A light on the dash, one that had been blinking on and off for months, now stayed fully lit, glowing red, like a warning he couldn't ignore anymore. He turned onto the main road and eased the accelerator down gently. The truck coughed once, then again. He gritted his teeth and tapped the dash like he always did when it acted up. Come on, not now. He made it another mile before the engine lurched violently. The steering wheel locked for a moment. A cloud of smoke puffed out from beneath the hood. He turned sharply into a lot. The same gas station again. Just in time to coast to a stop near the mechanic shop attached to the building. As the truck came to a halt, the engine shuddered and then went completely silent. Eric sat frozen, gripping the wheel. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. He reached for the key and tried again. Nothing. A long, low groan escaped his throat. He slammed his hand against the steering wheel once, then again, not hard enough to break anything. Just enough to let the ache crawl from his chest into his limbs. Not now. Please, not now. He opened the door and stepped out. The acrid smell of burnt oil and metal hit him hard. A puddle of dark fluid was already forming beneath the truck, spreading slowly over the sun-baked asphalt like blood from a wound. He bent down, trying to see underneath. Transmission fluid. Lots of it. And probably coolant, too. He stood back up, blinking against the sting in his eyes, and looked toward the corner garage. The bay door was half open. Inside, a heavy-set man in blue coveralls and a backwards baseball cap was finishing up paperwork. He looked like he was getting ready to close. Eric jogged over. "Hey, man," he called out, his voice strained. "You got a minute?" The mechanic turned slowly. He had a calm, sun-leathered face and eyes that had probably seen thousands of breakdowns. "It depends. What are we talking about?" "My van," Eric said, gesturing. "She just gave out on me." The man looked past him toward the truck and sighed. "Let's have a look." They walked across the lot in silence. The mechanic squatted low, pulled out a flashlight, and slid halfway under the truck on his side. Eric stood nearby, arms crossed, trying not to pace. After a few minutes, the man rolled out and stood up slowly, brushing off his hands on a rag he pulled from his back pocket. "How bad?" Eric asked. The mechanic didn't answer right away. He just looked at Eric for a long moment. "Transmission's gone," he said finally. "Cracked housing, fluid everywhere. And that's not the only problem. Your cooling system's leaking, your timing belt's frayed, and your exhaust manifold's about one pothole away from snapping in half." "Pig." Eric stared at him. "Okay, so, ballpark?" The man exhaled through his nose. 5, maybe 6 grand. And that's if you catch some parts on discount. Could take a week to order everything." Eric laughed once, but it came out like a cough. "The whole truck's not worth that." "Nope." He stepped back and leaned against the garage wall, rubbing the back of his neck. "You're better off scrapping it," the mechanic added. "Put that towards something used, something running." "I've got maybe $20 left to my name," Eric muttered. The mechanic didn't respond. Eric backed away slowly, walked toward the convenience store's curb and sat down with his hands on his knees. He stared at the ground. His legs were trembling. The sunset painted long orange streaks across the pavement, but all he saw was the puddle of fluid leaking under the truck, spreading like a verdict. This was it. No truck, no work, no money, no way to get to his kids. He pulled out his phone with shaking fingers and dialed. After 2 rings, the familiar voice of Mrs. Ramirez answered. "Mr. Eric?" "Hey," he said, trying to steady his voice. "Can you tell Lila and Ben that I'm okay? The truck died. I'm still at the gas station. I'm going to figure something out. He swallowed hard. "I just don't want them to worry." "They may are fine," Mrs. Ramirez said kindly. "We had soup. They are watching the stars. Don't worry. I'll stay with them tonight." He closed his eyes. "Thank you. That helps a lot." "Of course," she said softly. "And Eric? This isn't the end." He nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "I hope not." When the call ended, he kept holding the phone, staring at the black screen. Requests were still coming in on the delivery app. He couldn't accept any of them. Not without wheels. Not without hope. He set the phone down beside him and buried his face in his hands. His whole body sagged. It was over. He sat there for a long time, unmoving. Cars came and went. People filled up their tanks and bought snacks and went about their lives. No one looked twice at the man hunched over on the curb, defeated and sweating through his shirt. At some point, the sun disappeared completely, and the flickering overhead lights buzzed on. The hum was loud in the stillness, but Eric didn't move. His hands slowly slid down his face. He looked at the truck again. The cracked paint, the dented bumper, the sticky tape holding the glove compartment shut. That truck had carried home newborns, delivered presents wrapped in newspaper, hidden tears and whispered prayers when bills piled up. And now it was just dead weight. He felt the tears coming before he could stop them. He hadn't cried since the night his wife left. Not even when he lost the job. Not even when they moved into this place. But now he had nothing left to hold in. He let the tears fall silently, shoulders shaking under the flicker of fluorescent light. Not loud, not dramatic. Just quiet grief leaking through the cracks in a man who had tried too long to keep it together. Then, footsteps, soft, measured. He didn't lift his head until someone sat down beside him. A water bottle appeared in his peripheral vision, held out gently. Eric took it. His throat was dry. He opened the cap and drank without speaking, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Then he looked over. It was him, the man from earlier, the one who'd been behind him in line, with the motorcycle, with the steady eyes and soft voice. Now seated beside him on the curb, like they were old friends, just watching the night go by. Eric opened his mouth to speak, but the man raised a hand and shook his head once. Not yet. They sat in silence for a while. Finally, the man reached up and took off his baseball cap. Eric turned to get a better look. Even in the harsh white light, the features were unmistakable. The soft lines around the eyes, the jawline he'd seen on posters, on screens, the familiar kindness in the face. His heart stopped. Keanu Reeves. He didn't say anything. Neither did Keanu. They just sat there, side by side, both staring at the puddle of transmission fluid slowly evaporating into the heat-cracked pavement. Eric closed his eyes. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, he wasn't thinking about the bills, the food, the miles ahead. Just this moment. In this question, why had Keanu Reeves just sat down beside him? Eric wasn't sure how long they sat there before the silence finally broke. The water bottle rested half-empty between them, and the neon from the gas station sign buzzed above, casting both of their shadows long across the concrete. The heat of the day was finally beginning to let go, but Eric still felt it under his skin. He cleared his throat and wiped the back of his hand under his eyes. "I know you," he said quietly, voice rough from exhaustion and emotion. "Don't I?" The man turned slightly toward him and gave a small nod. Not proud, not cocky, just a quiet yes that somehow made the moment feel even stranger. "You're Keanu Reeves?" Eric said, almost like a question. "Aren't you?" Keanu nodded again, like it wasn't anything unusual. "Yeah." Eric stared at him. "I mean, I thought it was you earlier at the register, but I figured, no way. What are you doing out here, in Barstow, at this gas station?" Keanu gave a soft shrug. "I was passing through, riding north, took a back road, needed water and a break. Then I saw you, earlier, inside. You looked like you'd been through hell." Eric laughed once under his breath. "That obvious, huh?" Keanu smiled faintly. "I've been there." That response caught Eric off guard. He studied Keanu's face for signs of sarcasm, but there was none. Just a man sitting beside him, offering presence, not advice, not pity. "Thought maybe you could use some company," Keanu added. Eric nodded slowly. "Yeah, I guess I could." He looked down at the water bottle again, then back up. "You're not filming something? No cameras hiding behind the gas pumps?" Keanu shook his head. "No cameras, just me." Eric exhaled. "I don't mean to sound rude, this day's already felt like one long hallucination." "I get it." There was another moment of quiet. Then Keanu glanced at the truck. "Transmission?" Eric sighed. "And then some. Mechanic said I'd be better off setting it on fire." Keanu raised his eyebrows. "That bad?" "It's dead. Gone. And I've got 2 kids waiting at home. I was supposed to pick up dinner and maybe squeeze in one more delivery tonight. It's over now." Keanu nodded. "That's a lot to carry." Eric didn't answer. He felt a strange mix of humiliation and comfort. This man, this actor, this stranger, was seeing a version of him he rarely let anyone see. The broken part, the ashamed part. The man who had nothing left but stubborn love for 2 kids he couldn't stop letting down. "I'm sorry," Keanu said gently. "That sounds like a very hard day." Eric looked at him for a long moment, surprised by the sincerity. Yeah, he said softly. It has been. Keanu leaned forward a bit, resting his forearms on his knees. You said you've got 2 kids? He asked. Yeah, Eric replied, some warmth sneaking into his voice despite everything. Lila's 10. She's already smarter than me. And Ben's 7. He thinks we're going to buy a new truck with his penny jar savings. Keanu smiled. How much has he got saved? About $2.91, Eric said with a sad laugh. He adds to it every time he finds a coin on the floor. He's got the right idea. Eric nodded. He believes in magic, still thinks anything's possible. There was pride in his voice. And pain. Because Eric didn't believe it anymore. Not really. What about their mom? Keanu asked gently. Eric hesitated. He looked down, fiddling with the cap of the water bottle. She left 2 years ago. Said she couldn't take the stress. We'd just lost the house. I lost the job not long after. One day she packed a bag and told the kids she was going on a trip. Never came back. Keanu was quiet. I haven't heard from her since, Eric added. I'm sorry, Keanu said. I used to be angry about it. But now, I just want to make sure my kids never feel that kind of abandonment again. He paused. But tonight, I don't know, sitting there watching that truck die, I felt like I'd failed them. Keanu turned toward him. Being there is the win. No matter how broke, no matter how tired, they know you show up. That's more than most kids get. Eric blinked fast, feeling something shift in his chest. You're good at this, he said after a moment. This listening thing. Keanu chuckled. It helps when people stop pretending they're okay. Most of us aren't, not really. Eric nodded, not sure what to say next. He didn't want pity, but this didn't feel like pity. It felt like someone seeing the whole picture and choosing to sit next to it anyway. So what did you do before all this? Keanu asked. Before the deliveries and scraping together change for gas. Eric smiled faintly, rubbing his palms together. I used to work in thermal systems, battery containment mostly, specialized in keeping lithium-ion units cool in high-heat environments. I helped design components for solar backup arrays. I was part of a team out in Tempe. Keanu's expression didn't change, but his eyes focused more. That's impressive, he said. Still got your notes? Eric chuckled bitterly. Yeah, a notebook full of ideas nobody cares about. I've tweaked the designs over the years. Nights when the kids are asleep and I need to feel like I still know something useful. Keanu's voice was softer now. You ever think about finishing it, pushing the design forward? Eric looked at him, half smiling, half pained. Only every day. Keanu sat with that answer for a moment. The night air was cooler now, just enough to remind them that time was passing. Fewer cars pulled into the station. The lot was quiet. You said something earlier, Eric continued, his voice thoughtful. About having been through hell. That you've been there. Keanu nodded slowly. I've had a few seasons like that, he said. Loss, grief, long stretches where nothing made sense, where I felt like I was watching my own life from the outside. Eric studied him. I guess I always figured people like you had it easier. Keanu tilted his head. Easier doesn't mean untouched. Eric let that sink in. There was something deeply human about the way Keanu spoke. Nothing polished or rehearsed. Just real. You've got a good mind, Keanu said. I could tell the moment you started talking about battery cooling. Not everyone carries their knowledge like that. Casually, but with precision. Eric smiled faintly. You talk like someone who's been around engineers. I've worked with a few, Keanu said. Eric raised an eyebrow. In films? Keanu grinned. In life. Eric leaned back against the wall, stretching his legs out in front of him. It's funny, he said. For years I told myself I'd keep those ideas alive, that maybe, one day, someone would want them. But lately, I'm just trying to keep dinner on the table. Keanu nodded. That doesn't make the ideas less valuable, just makes you a dad who knows his priorities. Eric looked down. I don't know if I'm even doing that part right. Keanu paused. Then he said, Do your kids know you love them? Every day. Then you're doing it right. Eric's throat tightened again, but this time it wasn't from despair. It was from the strange peace that came with being understood. I'm not trying to impress anyone, he said. I just want them to believe that I didn't give up, that I kept trying, even when nothing worked. You don't have to explain that to me, Keanu replied. Trying, when everything is against you, is the hardest and most honest thing a person can do. They sat in silence for a moment longer. Then Keanu stood and brushed off his jeans. Eric watched him. You heading out? Keanu looked toward his motorcycle, then back at Eric. No, he said. Not yet. He pulled something out of his pocket, a folded piece of paper, and held it out. What's that? Eric asked, taking it. An address, Keanu said. There's a place a couple miles from here. Stay open late. I think someone there might want to hear more about those notebook sketches of yours. Eric looked down at the paper, then back up. Why are you doing this? Keanu met his eyes. Because I believe you didn't stop trying. Eric unfolded the paper Keanu had handed him. The address, written in tight, clear handwriting, belonged to a local automotive tech shop he vaguely recognized by name but had never been inside. He looked up, still confused, holding the paper like it might explain itself further. I don't get it, Eric said. You want me to talk to someone there? Eventually, Keanu replied. But first, I want to talk to you. Eric blinked. About what? Keanu gestured toward the edge of the gas station building, where a couple of metal chairs sat near a vending machine, probably meant for truckers or tired employees. Without waiting, he walked over and sat down, motioning for Eric to join him. Eric followed, hesitant. He still wasn't sure what this was, a conversation, a trap, some weird viral video setup. Keanu leaned back in the chair and crossed one ankle over his knee. You said you worked on thermal containment systems, he said, casually. What exactly were you fixing? Eric scratched the back of his neck, feeling the instinct to downplay everything. It was part of a bigger team. I wasn't the brains behind it. Sure, Keanu said. But what did you fix? Eric glanced around, making sure no one was listening. Then he sat down and exhaled slowly. We were working on passive cooling systems for lithium-ion battery arrays, he said. Mostly for backup power systems, solar grid support, some applications in vehicle storage. Keanu nodded slowly, genuinely interested. Passive meaning no fans? Right, no moving parts. The idea was to use structural geometry and natural thermal flow to dissipate heat. The company was trying to reduce cost, weight, and failure points. You worked on that? I helped design a ceramic lattice system, Eric admitted, eyes fixed on the cracked concrete between his boots. It redirected heat toward external fins through capillary action and honeycomb airflow channels. Pretty clever stuff, but not exactly exciting to most people. Keanu's eyebrows lifted. You still have the design? Eric hesitated. Yeah. In my bag. Keanu smiled. Want to show me? Eric looked at him. You serious? I wouldn't be sitting out here past midnight in Barstow if I wasn't. Eric stood and walked to the truck. He opened the passenger side door and reached behind the seat. A moment later, he returned, holding a beat-up, spiral-bound notebook with a bent cover and pages dog-eared from years of flipping. He handed it over like it was something fragile. Keanu opened it slowly, thumbing through the pages. Some were sketches. Others had numbers, test results, cross-section diagrams, even handwritten questions in the margins. At one point, Keanu stopped on a dense graph showing thermal gradients along layered ceramics. You did this by hand? He asked. Eric nodded. Back when I thought it would go somewhere. Keanu looked up. It still might. Keanu flipped another few pages, stopping at a large diagram with colored markers faded from time. The illustration showed a curved panel structure shaped like a honeycomb, with heat zones mapped along the edges. This, Keanu said, tapping the corner. Looks like something out of a next-gen energy lab. Eric laughed softly. I think that's what I hoped someone would say 5 years ago. Keanu looked at him seriously. You never submitted it for a patent? I tried, Eric said. Started the paperwork, but after I got laid off, we couldn't afford the fees. Then the company collapsed and I just moved on. But you didn't really move on, Keanu said. You kept working on it. Eric nodded. Late nights, when the kids were asleep, it was the only thing I had left that still made me feel useful. Keanu turned to the inside cover, where several sticky notes had been stuck and restuck over time. One read, Gen 4, no airflow dependency. Another had just 2 words, desert viable. You were thinking about applications for high heat regions. Yeah, Eric replied. The idea was to develop something that wouldn't rely on air circulation alone, something durable, cheap, and usable in solar grids, electric cars, even satellite housing. I was trying to build resilience into energy storage. Keanu smiled faintly. You ever heard the phrase, there's no such thing as wasted talent, only talent waiting for a match? Eric shook his head. Is that from a movie? Keanu shrugged. Maybe, or maybe it's just true. He turned toward the vending machine, tore a brown napkin from the side dispenser, and pulled a pen from his pocket. Without explanation, he started sketching. Eric leaned closer. What are you drawing? Keanu kept his eyes on the napkin. Something I saw once. A variation of a thermal plate we used on a film project. It simulated ice core layers under heat exposure. Fiction, mostly. But it made me think of your concept. He finished the quick sketch, then turned the napkin toward Eric. I'm no engineer, Keanu said. But what if you fused this concept with your lattice here? Eric stared at the drawing. The shape of the napkin sketch mimicked the layers he'd theorized in his notebook. A composite curve that could channel rising heat toward edge releasing zones. His brain, half asleep and still dazed from everything, lit up in a way it hadn't in years. You'd reduce your top-end expansion pressure, Eric murmured, but if you tapered the inner plate here, he pointed, you could rebalance thermal flux at the base. Keanu smiled. That's what I thought. Eric blinked, hard. In the middle of a gas station lot, with a stranger sketching on napkins under broken neon lights, he was having a conversation he hadn't had in almost a decade. About ideas. Real ones. He could feel something shifting inside him. Not the truck. Not the finances. Him. Keanu handed the napkin over and leaned back again. You've got something here, Eric. You know that, right? Eric looked down at the napkin and then back at his notebook. It doesn't matter if I know it. No one wants to fund broken trucks and past due rent. True, Keanu said, but maybe they'd be willing to invest in a mind that never gave up. Eric shook his head slowly. I'm not some prodigy. I don't have degrees from Stanford or a resume with gold stars. But you've got years of experience, Keanu replied. And more importantly, you've got context. You didn't design this in a vacuum. You built it with sweat and life in the margins. Eric's eyes stung. He rubbed them and looked away. I'm just a dad trying to get peanut butter on the table. Keanu nodded. That's exactly why your work matters. Eric didn't respond right away. Instead, he opened his notebook again and flipped to a page halfway through. It was a newer design, rough, scribbled fast, but layered with thought. As he traced a line with his finger, his voice softened. This one was supposed to be the next generation. I never finished it. The core idea was that if we could alternate ceramic densities and apply a gradient model to the surface material, we might reduce the need for any kind of active cooling, even in vehicles under high-speed stress. Keanu leaned in again, fascinated. Eric kept talking. But I didn't have the tools. Couldn't run simulations anymore. No lab, no funding, just guesses. Smart guesses, Keanu said. Eric looked up. You really think any of this could go somewhere? I do, Keanu said firmly, "because I've seen the real thing before, and this is the real thing." Eric exhaled slowly, the weight of the last few years catching up with him. He'd been alone with these ideas for so long. No feedback, no questions, no belief. Until now. Keanu looked down at the address again. "There's someone I'd like you to talk to, a guy I've worked with before, quiet, low-key. He builds electric conversions and tests thermal arrays, mostly under the radar, but if he likes your thinking, he'll open doors." Eric didn't answer. "Not yet." "I'm not asking you to hope," Keanu said softly. "I'm just asking you to try one more time." Eric looked at the napkin again, then at the notebook, then back at the man sitting beside him who'd asked all the right questions, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He closed the notebook slowly, and for the first time in years, he said the words without doubt. "I can fix it." The parking lot had grown quiet. The last of the late-night customers had drifted off, and the overhead lights flickered lazily above Eric and Keanu as they sat by the vending machine, notebook and napkin sketch between them. The air was cooler now. The heat of the day finally lifted, but Eric still felt the weight of it, deep in his chest, coiled around his ribs. Keanu glanced down at the pages again, then looked back up. "You know," he said gently, "I've met a lot of people who walk away from what they love, especially when life gets hard. But you didn't." Eric didn't respond at first. His jaw tensed slightly, and he stared at the corner of the building like it held answers. Finally, he rubbed his hands together, the skin dry and calloused from years of manual labor. "I tried to walk away," he said. "More times than I can count." "Then why didn't you?" Keanu asked. Eric looked down at his lap, and for a long moment it seemed like he might not say anything else. But then his shoulders slumped, and his voice came low and quiet. "Because my daughter thinks I'm still a genius." Keanu didn't move. Eric went on, slower now. "Lila, she found my notebook a few months back. I didn't even know she'd seen it. I came home from a night shift, and there it was, open on the couch, sticky notes rearranged, with one of her crayon drawings tucked inside." He smiled faintly at the memory, then swallowed hard. She had written this little note in the corner. Said I was going to be famous someday, that I'd fix the world's batteries and save the planet, and I couldn't let her be wrong. Keanu said nothing, but the look in his eyes changed. A softness, a recognition. Eric's voice cracked. She already lost her mom. She already had to grow up too fast. I didn't want her looking at me and seeing just another broken man she had to tiptoe around. I wanted her to believe in something. In someone. He looked away, wiping at his face again, embarrassed by the emotions spilling over. "She doesn't ask for much," he whispered. "Neither of them do. But they believe in me. And most days, that's the only thing that keeps me going." Keanu leaned forward slightly, his voice just above a whisper. "That's not small, Eric." Eric gave a humorless laugh. "Feels small when you can't even afford gas." "But you built something," Keanu said. "Even when the world told you it didn't matter anymore, you kept working, kept thinking. That's not desperation. That's discipline. That's purpose." Eric blinked hard and looked down at his hands. "I guess I didn't know how to stop believing." "And that," Keanu said softly, "is why you deserve to be heard." Eric sat still, the words hanging in the space between them like fragile glass. No one had said anything like that to him in years. Not since the company shut down. Not since the manager laid him off with a tired apology and a final paycheck that barely covered groceries. Most people, when they asked about his background, just nodded and changed the subject when he mentioned batteries or thermal gradients. They didn't get it. They didn't care to. His ideas were clutter to them, a hobby at best. But not to Keanu. He was listening. And not just with politeness, with genuine curiosity, with respect. Eric looked back down at the notebook and opened to the page where Lila had once stuck her crayon drawing. The paper was gone now. He'd carefully preserved it in a shoebox back home, but he could still see the faint marks where the tape had held it. A picture of a house with solar panels and a big sun in the corner. Stick figure Eric holding hands with two smaller figures. The sun had a face. Everything smiled in that drawing. She said she wanted to live in a house that ran on Dad's battery magic. Eric said quietly. Keanu smiled. Sounds like she's proud of you. I think so, Eric replied. But it scares me too. What if one day she realizes I was just faking it? You're not faking it, Keanu said, his tone firmer now. You're fighting. And there's a difference. Eric nodded slowly. I used to believe I was smart. I used to walk into meetings with confidence, like my ideas could change something. And now, I can't even walk into a grocery store without counting pennies. Keanu didn't argue with that. Instead, he asked, What's the last thing you built that made you proud? Eric smiled faintly. I built a prototype shell for my cooling lattice with salvaged parts from an old window AC unit. It wasn't pretty, but it held temperature variance under 12 degrees Celsius for 3 hours in 104-degree weather. Keanu raised an eyebrow. That's incredible. Not according to most people. You're not talking to most people, Keanu replied. Eric chuckled quietly. No, I guess I'm not. Another pause, then Keanu asked something softer. Do your kids know you still build? Eric hesitated. They know I stay up late drawing things. They call it Dad Science Time. I don't think they realize what it means to me. Keanu looked thoughtful. Maybe one day they will. Maybe one day they'll look back and realize they were raised by someone who kept dreaming, even when everything around him tried to make him stop. Eric said nothing, but his hand closed tighter around the notebook. Something had shifted. He could feel it. And for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like something breaking. It felt like something waking up. Keanu leaned back in his chair and let the silence settle for a moment. Then he spoke again, his voice lower, more reflective. You know, he said, people ask me all the time why I keep doing what I do. Why I don't just disappear. Why I still take the hard roles or ride the long miles alone. They think the success should be enough. Eric listened, curious. But I don't do it for success, Keanu continued. I do it because there are moments that remind me what I'm made of. People who remind me why I started in the first place. He looked at Eric. You reminded me tonight. Aaron blinked. Me? Yeah, Keanu said. You've got no safety net, no script, no crew, and still, here you are, holding on to this design like it matters. Not for fame, not for money, just because you believe it's right. Eric didn't know what to say. Keanu leaned forward again, picking up the notebook. This isn't just an idea, it's a promise that even in the worst times you're still thinking about solutions, still imagining something better. He handed it back to Eric, who took it carefully, as if it were more fragile now than ever. You asked me why I'm here tonight, Keanu said. It's because people like you are rare, and when I meet someone who hasn't given up, not in the movies, but in real life, I pay attention. Eric looked at the address in his other hand. You think they'll actually care about this? Keanu's gaze didn't waver. I think they'll care, because I'll make sure they listen. Eric looked away, emotions rising again. Don't get me wrong, he said. I'm grateful. I don't know if I remember how to believe anymore. Keanu nodded. That's okay. I can believe for both of us, at least until you catch up. Eric laughed once, a real laugh this time, short but full. You've done this before, haven't you? Keanu tilted his head. Done what? Sat beside someone at rock bottom. Keanu's smile was faint. A few times. Eric looked up at the sky. A few stars had pushed their way through the haze. Somewhere far away, trucks rumbled along the highway. All right, he said. Let's say I try. Let's say I go to that address tomorrow. What then? Keanu stood slowly, his boots scraping lightly against the concrete. Then, he said. You show them what you showed me. And if they don't listen, then we find someone else who will. Eric nodded slowly, feeling the notebook warm in his hand. The pages that had once felt like a tomb now felt like a door, one that might finally open. Eric was still holding the notebook in his lap when Keanu's phone buzzed in his pocket. The soft vibration broke the quiet hum of the night. Keanu glanced at the screen, his expression shifting ever so slightly. He stood without a word and stepped a few feet away, the glow of the gas station lights painting a silhouette around him. Eric didn't listen in. He sat there staring at the now familiar napkin sketch and the address written neatly on the folded slip of paper. The address felt like it glowed in the dark. Or maybe that was just the part of him that didn't know what to do with this kind of hope. After a few minutes, Keanu returned. There was a calm, collected look on his face, an almost stillness that Eric had noticed in him all night. Like he carried the weight of something bigger and knew exactly how to hold it. He had an envelope in his hand. It was thick, sealed, and unmarked. Keanu held it out. Eric didn't move right away. What's this? Keanu smiled faintly. Something for tomorrow. Don't open it tonight. Eric raised an eyebrow. Seriously? Seriously. Tomorrow morning, first thing. Promise me. Eric reached out and took it. The envelope was heavy, and that made it feel dangerous somehow, or miraculous. He couldn't tell the difference. What's in it? Keanu didn't answer directly. Let's just say it might help you walk through the next door. Eric held it between his fingers like it might disappear. This isn't charity, right? No, Keanu said. It's a bridge. For someone who's ready to walk across. Eric looked down at it. The seal was thick and pressed tight. Whatever was inside had been packed deliberately. Can I ask why? He murmured. Keanu sat down beside him again. Because I've been in places where I needed someone to believe in me when I had nothing left. And when someone finally did, it changed everything. Eric nodded slowly, unsure of whether to feel grateful, terrified, or numb. You really think this whole thing is going to lead somewhere? He asked. Keanu looked at him, unwavering. I think you've already led yourself here. Now it's time someone opened a door for you. Eric swallowed, a knot forming in his chest. He hadn't expected tonight to go like this. Hadn't expected anything except defeat. And now? Now he was holding something he didn't dare hope about. I don't know what to say, he said. You don't have to say anything, Keanu replied. Just follow through. A moment passed. Then Keanu stood again and tapped on his phone. I've arranged a ride, he said, and a tow. They'll be here in 10 minutes. Eric blinked. A tow? Yeah. Your truck's not dead yet. I've got someone who owes me a favor. Eric looked stunned. You did that in the last 5 minutes? Keanu grinned. You'd be surprised how fast things move when people believe something's worth saving. True to Keanu's word, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled into the lot exactly 10 minutes later. The driver stepped out, greeted Keanu with a handshake, and then opened the rear door for Eric. Right behind the SUV, a tow truck rolled in, its lights flashing silently as it turned into the space beside Eric's battered old pickup. Eric stood next to Keanu, still clutching the sealed envelope in one hand and his weathered notebook in the other. This is really happening? He asked quietly, half to himself. Keanu looked him square in the eye. Yes, but only if you let it. The tow driver approached, clipboard in hand. You the owner? He asked. Eric nodded. We'll get her to a partner shop just outside town, the driver said. Won't cost you anything. It's already covered. Mr. Reeves gave us the work order. Eric opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. Thank you, he said finally, voice low. The driver nodded, then moved to hook up the truck. Eric turned back to Keanu. I don't know what you saw in me tonight, but I won't waste it. Keanu smiled. I saw someone who still builds. That's all I needed." They shook hands. Keanu's grip was firm, steady. Eric climbed into the SUV with his backpack beside him and the envelope still tucked under his arm. As they pulled away, he looked back through the tinted glass. Keanu stood in the glow of the gas station sign, his hands in his pockets, watching the truck get lifted gently onto the flatbed. Then he was gone. The ride home was quiet. The driver didn't ask questions, and Eric didn't offer any. He stared out the window, watching the desert blur past, the stars overhead sharper than he'd ever noticed before. Maybe he'd just never looked up at the right moment. When they reached his apartment complex, the SUV pulled up in front without a word. Eric stepped out, thanked the driver, and walked up the steps slowly, as if each one had a different weight to carry. Inside, the apartment was still. A single lamp glowed in the corner. The air smelled faintly of cumin and beans. Leftover soup from Mrs. Ramirez, probably. He tiptoed past the couch, where Lila and Ben lay sleeping side by side under a shared blanket. Their hands were tangled together. Ben's wishing jar sat nearby, its copper contents glinting softly under the light. Eric smiled, then turned to the kitchen counter. He set the envelope down gently, like it was a fragile piece of glass. He stared at it for a long time. Eric sat down in the kitchen chair, eyes still fixed on the envelope. The edges were sealed tight, crisp and precise. There was no writing on it, no clue, no logo, just the silence of possibility. He tapped the table slowly, rhythmically, like trying to ground himself. Everything that had happened tonight kept replaying in his mind. Keanu's voice, the weight of the notebook, the questions, the napkin sketch, and now this sealed promise sitting in front of him. He reached out once, touched the envelope with his fingertips, then pulled his hand back. He could open it right now. It was his after all. But part of him was afraid. What if it was a prank? What if it was empty? What if the promise wasn't real? The idea of hope scared him more than disappointment. With disappointment, you knew what you were getting. Hope? Hope made you dream again. And dreaming hurt when you'd spent years learning how not to. He stood, paced once around the room, then glanced over at the kids. Still asleep, still unaware of what might be changing. Eric walked back to the table. He reached for the envelope again, but stopped himself. Keanu's words echoed in his mind. "Tomorrow, first thing, trust me." He sat back down and rubbed his face with both hands. Sleep would be impossible, but he had to try. He placed the envelope on the top shelf of the cabinet above the fridge, out of sight but not out of mind. Then he turned off the lamp, tiptoed into the bedroom, and lay down on the edge of his bed. He stared at the ceiling, the fan slowly turning above him. He didn't cry this time, didn't spiral into panic. Instead, his mind worked through the layers of the cooling system again, the ceramic shells, the thermal gradients, the napkin sketch, Keanu's questions, his voice, that strange stillness. Tomorrow might be the beginning of something. But tonight he would let himself believe just a little. He rolled over to face the window and whispered into the dark, "Please, let it be real." Then he closed his eyes and waited for morning. The morning light spilled softly across the living room carpet as the sun rose over Barstow. The silence in the apartment was broken by the creak of a cupboard and the gentle clink of glass against wood. Lila stood on her tiptoes, stretching to reach the cereal bowls. She wasn't usually up this early, but something in her chest had told her today was different. She didn't know why. She pulled down the bowls, careful not to wake her little brother, still snoring on the couch, then paused. The cupboard door was slightly ajar and tucked just out of view. On the top shelf above the fridge, she noticed the corner of something white. Curious, she stood on the kitchen chair, reached up, and carefully pulled down a sealed envelope. There was no writing, no address, but it felt important, heavy, like something her dad wouldn't just forget. She looked at it for a long moment, then turned as she heard the soft shuffle of feet behind her. "Lila?" Eric's voice was still raspy from sleep. He rubbed his eyes as he stepped into the kitchen. "What are you doing up?" "I was getting bowls," she said quickly, then hesitated. "Dad, what's this?" She held up the envelope, her small hands steady despite the question in her eyes. Eric stopped. For a second, he considered making up something simple, telling her it was paperwork, junk mail. But the truth was, his daughter always knew when he was lying. She always had. He sighed, walked over to her, and sat down at the table. She joined him, placing the envelope in front of them both. "It's from someone I met last night," Eric said slowly. "Someone who saw something in me I didn't think anyone still could." Lila furrowed her brow. Eric hesitated. "A man on a motorcycle. He stopped by the gas station when the truck broke down. I was in a bad place." Lila looked worried. "Did he hurt you?" "No," Eric said quickly. "No, sweetheart. He didn't hurt me. He listened." Lila tilted her head. "To what?" Eric reached for his notebook, which sat beside the microwave where he'd left it the night before. He opened it, flipping to a page filled with colored diagrams and calculations. "My ideas," he said. "All the things I'd been working on late at night, the battery stuff, the designs I used to show your mom." Lila's eyes widened. "He listened to that?" Eric nodded. And not just listened. He understood it, asked questions, took it seriously. There was a long pause. Then Lila asked softly, "Do you think he believes in it?" Eric looked at her. His eyes shimmered with something that hadn't been there in a long time. "I think he believes in me." Ben shuffled in next, yawning and dragging his blanket behind him. He blinked at the kitchen light, then rubbed his eyes. "Why am I so everyone whispering?" he mumbled. Lila smiled and patted the seat next to her. "Come here. Dad met someone last night." Ben slid into the chair and looked around for food. When he spotted the envelope on the table, he pointed. "What's that?" Eric smiled softly. "That's what we're about to find out." He reached for it slowly, running his thumb along the sealed edge. The weight of it had sat on his chest all night like an unanswered question. But now, with both his children sitting beside him, wide-ached and waiting, the moment felt full. He broke the seal. Inside were two things: a short handwritten note and a folded sheet of official letterhead. He opened the note first. It said only, "For your next step. You've earned it." Lila leaned closer. "Is that from the man?" Eric nodded slowly, then unfolded the letter. His eyes scanned the contents once, then again. His breath caught. "What is it, Dad?" Ben asked. Eric handed it over to Lila, his hand slightly trembling. She read it aloud, slowly. "To Eric Dawson, this letter confirms a standing invitation to present your passive ceramic thermal containment design to our independent R&D partner. Please arrive at 9 a.m. Monday at the listed address. All expenses, including transport and accommodations, will be covered. Preliminary support has been arranged to repair your current vehicle and assist with your presentation materials. This is not a job offer yet, but an opportunity to showcase your thinking to a team who values innovation from those who live it." Ben stared blankly. "What does that mean?" Lila looked up at her dad, her face glowing with something just short of disbelief. "It means someone finally saw what you've been building." Eric nodded. "It means I'm going to get to show my work to real engineers, to people who might actually want to help build it." Ben gasped. "Are we going to be rich?" Eric chuckled. "We're not even close to that. But we might be headed towards something better." Lila's voice was soft. "Does this mean your truck's going to work again?" Eric nodded. "They're fixing it right now." Ben jumped up from his chair. "Then we don't need the jar anymore." He ran to his bedroom and returned with the pickle jar labeled Dad's Dream Truck in crooked, fading marker. He held it out. Let's buy donuts to celebrate." Eric laughed, his heart feeling lighter than it had in years. "Maybe just one donut. We still have to be careful." Lila reached for her sketch pad and began drawing. Eric leaned over and smiled. She was updating the dream house again. Only this time, beside the stick figure version of their family, she drew someone new. A man with long hair and a motorcycle helmet resting beside him. She didn't ask his name. She just labeled him, the man who listened. The letter lay flat on the table now, reread a dozen times by 3 sets of eyes. Lila kept pointing to the words invitation and R&D partner, while Ben bounced in his seat, convinced they were on the verge of becoming inventors and millionaires. Eric didn't correct either of them just yet. He was still processing the second part of the envelope, the piece he hadn't shown them. Tucked beneath the letter was a sleek black card. It wasn't plastic like a credit card. It was matte paper, thick, smooth, with a faint shimmer when tilted in the light. On the front, printed in elegant embossed letters, Keanu Reeves Foundation for Innovation. Hotel reservation confirmed, 2 nights. Barstow Grand Lodge, room 47. Check in, Sunday 3 p.m. Check out, Tuesday, noon. Eric turned it over. On the back, a single line in silver ink. Monday, 2 p.m. Come as you are. He read it once, then again. The last 3 words stuck in his throat. Come as you are. Not suit and tie required. Not bring a resume. Not prepare a portfolio or cover letter. Just come as you are. He hadn't cried at the gas station. Not when his truck died. Not when Keanu recognized the potential in his sketches. Not when his daughter showed him a drawing that included a stranger beside their family. But now, he turned away slightly as his eyes welled up, not out of sadness, but because, for the first time in years, he wasn't being asked to prove he was worthy of being in the room. He was simply being invited into it. Ben noticed his dad's silence. "Are you okay?" Eric nodded, blinking rapidly. "Yeah, buddy, I'm great." "Is it a good hotel?" Lila asked, cautiously hopeful. Eric smiled. "It's not the kind with coin-operated air conditioners, that's for sure." She laughed and leaned into his side. "Do you think it'll have one of those breakfast rooms with muffins and juice?" "If it does," Eric said, "I'll smuggle you both a cinnamon roll." Ben perked up. "Yes, with extra butter." Eric slipped the card back into the envelope. His hands were still shaking, not from nerves, but from the adrenaline of a dream creeping out of the dark, daring to stand in the daylight. This wasn't a handout. It was something else, something far more rare. Recognition. They were still sitting at the table, finishing the last bites of dry cereal, when a low rumble came from outside. Then a honk. Not sharp, not urgent. Just a short, polite beep. Lila and Ben rushed to the window. Lila's gasp said it before she did. "Dad, the truck's back." Eric stood slowly, heart thudding. He stepped toward the door, opened it, and walked out onto the landing. At the curb sat his truck. But it wasn't the same. The dents along the passenger side were gone. The faded blue paint had been refreshed, cleaned and polished until it shone softly under the morning light. The cracked headlight had been replaced. Even the tires looked newer. Eric walked down the steps in silence, every footfall soft, like he didn't trust the moment yet. The tow driver from last night stood beside the vehicle, clipboard in hand, smiling. "Good morning, Mr. Dawson." Eric nodded slowly. "You brought it back." "Not just brought it back," the man said proudly. "Transmission's been rebuilt, cooling systems new, belts replaced, oil flushed, tires rotated, a /C serviced. We even buffed out the oxidation on the hood." Eric's mouth opened, then closed again. How much did all that cost?" The driver held out the clipboard. Eric took it, expecting a number that would make his knees weak. Instead, he found a note scrawled across the work order in blue ink. "Paid in full." Eric looked up, voice shaking. He did all this? The man nodded. Didn't want you breaking down on your way to the interview. Behind him, Lila and Ben had come outside, barefoot on the concrete, eyes wide. "Whoa," Ben exclaimed. "It's like a brand new truck." Lila ran her fingers along the door. "It doesn't even smell like old fries anymore." Eric stepped closer and opened the driver's door. Inside, the changes were just as clear. The cracked dashboard had been repaired, the steering wheel rewrapped in fresh leather, and the seat stitching redone. The A/C blew cool air with a gentle hum. The old check engine light that had glared at him for the past 2 years was gone. Everything about it felt different, except the key. The same worn metal key sat in the ignition. It was still his truck, just no longer broken. The tow driver handed him the clipboard back and tipped his cap. "Good luck tomorrow, Mr. Dawson." Eric nodded, words failing him. As the truck driver climbed back into his own vehicle and pulled away, Eric stood there for a moment with the keys in his hand. "Can we ride in it?" Ben asked, practically vibrating. "Later," Eric said with a small laugh. "We've got somewhere to be first." "Where?" Lila asked. Eric turned toward them, the sunlight catching his face. "We're going to get donuts." Ben cheered, running back toward the apartment to get shoes. Lila hesitated. "Are you scared?" Eric looked at her, surprised. "Scared of what?" "Of tomorrow." He thought for a moment. Then he said, "No, I'm nervous, but I'm not scared." "Because of the man?" "Because of the work," Eric said. "Because someone finally saw it, and because I believe, really believe, it's time." Lila nodded slowly, then reached for his hand. "Then let's go get those donuts." They walked toward the truck together, the engine purring like it hadn't in years, and behind them the open door of their apartment swayed in the breeze, letting in the sound of something new. "Oh." Eric stood in front of the downtown building, clutching his old backpack and staring up at the shimmering glass exterior that reflected the California sky. The address matched the card. The tall silver letters over the doors read, "Keanu Reeves, Foundation for Innovation." It looked like a tech company, a law office, and a museum of the future all at once. He swallowed hard. The automatic doors opened as he approached, and he stepped inside. Cool air wrapped around him like a gentle reminder that this wasn't the world he usually lived in. The lobby had high ceilings, plants growing from vertical walls, and quiet, efficient voices behind polished desks. A soft-spoken receptionist greeted him. "Mr. Dawson?" He nodded. "Mr. Reeves is expecting you. Elevators to your left, top floor. They're ready for you." Eric took a breath. "Thanks." As he rode the elevator up, the seconds ticked louder than the motor. He checked his reflection in the mirrored panel. His shirt was freshly ironed, his notebook clutched to his chest like armor. It wasn't a suit, but it was who he was. When the doors opened, he stepped into a quiet hallway. A woman in a charcoal gray blouse waited just outside a glass-walled conference room. "You made it," she said, smiling. "I'm Dana. Follow me, please." Eric's pulse hammered in his neck. He followed her through the glass doors. Inside, the room was bright and minimal. A long table stretched across the center. At one end sat Keanu, dressed in a crisp navy blazer and dark jeans. Around the table were 4 other people, 2 men, 2 women, each with a tablet or laptop in front of them. Keanu stood, smiling. "Eric, glad you're here." Eric gave a small nod. "Thanks for inviting me. This is our R&D team. We've been looking forward to seeing what you've got." He motioned to the head of the table. "Take a seat, no pressure." That was a lie. Eric felt nothing but pressure. He took the chair, opened his notebook slowly, and placed it in the center of the table. His fingers trembled slightly as he flipped to the key diagram. Keanu leaned back, letting his team take the lead. One of the engineers, a woman in her 30s with curly dark hair and sharp eyes, leaned in. "This is your multi-layer ceramic structure?" she asked, tapping the diagram. Eric cleared his throat. "Yes, It's a modular heat dispersion shell designed to regulate thermal load across battery packs, especially in climates with extreme temperature shifts. The room quieted. Someone typed. Another flipped through the pages he'd laid out. For a second, Eric felt like a fraud. These were real engineers, professionals, people with degrees and labs and titles. He was a single dad who fixed toasters for cash. Then the woman spoke again. "Where did you develop this design?" Eric answered. "It started when I worked in solar arrays, but I kept developing it on my own, nights, weekends, after the layoffs." She looked at him, expression unreadable. "You built all this without a lab?" Eric hesitated. "Just some salvaged parts, modeling software, and a lot of stubbornness." Someone else chuckled, and the tension in the room shifted. The questions began. "What's your projected thermal delta over a 24-hour cycle? What's the material cost for each layer? Have you tested this in high-vibration environments?" Eric answered carefully, sometimes needing a moment to think, sometimes flipping through pages of hand-sketched notes. But with each answer, his voice grew steadier. He'd lived with this design, breathed it, rebuilt it 100 times in his mind. It wasn't theoretical for him, it was real. Halfway through the meeting, he noticed one of the engineers, a younger man with glasses and a British accent, lean toward Keanu and whisper something. Keanu gave a small nod. Eric kept going. He explained how the honeycomb lattice reduced weight while maintaining surface contact, how the outer shell used aluminum oxide to shed heat quickly, and how the deeper layers used alternating ceramic materials to control transfer speed. He pulled out the napkin from the gas station, the one with Keanu's sketch beside his. "That's where we figured out the radial taper," Eric said, tapping the edge. "It equalizes the pressure on the inner core when temperature spikes." The woman with curly hair looked at it closely. "You've never published this?" Eric shook his head. "Didn't have the means. Or the time." She stared at him for a long second, then turned to the others. "This solution could change battery resilience in poor communities, especially where environmental controls are limited." Eric blinked. She turned back to him. "Have you considered its application in developing countries? It could make solar storage units far more efficient in areas without grid stabilization." Eric's mouth opened slightly. "No, I was focused on vehicles, but yeah, it would work in residential systems too." Keanu smiled. One of the other engineers chimed in. "The cost model actually looks better at the residential scale, especially with those material choices." The next hour became something Eric had never expected, an actual design session. The team began building on his concept, throwing out scenarios, stress testing assumptions, even sketching on the whiteboard. Keanu mostly listened, occasionally asking a question that cut right to the heart of the problem. When it quieted again, the woman at the table looked at Eric. "We'd like to prototype this." Eric's chest tightened. Keanu nodded. "We want to offer you a position here. You'd work with this team, full resources. Your design would move to the next phase. We'll test it, build it, prove it." Eric looked down, overcome. "I don't even have a degree," he said softly. Keanu leaned forward. "Your notebook says otherwise." Eric looked at his notebook, the old spiral-bound one with dog-eared corners, grease smudges, and a drawing from Lila hidden in the back cover. It didn't look like much, but now it looked like everything. "So," Keanu asked, "you in?" Eric looked around the table. Then he nodded, voice breaking slightly. "I'm in." The conference room emptied slowly. The engineers packed up their tablets and sketches, a quiet buzz of excitement still hanging in the air. Eric stood near the window, notebook in hand, staring out over the rooftops of Barstow's modest skyline. The sunlight was hitting the glass just right. It cast his reflection back at him, not the tired man from last night, but someone standing a little taller, shoulders no longer sagging under invisible weight. Behind him, Keanu lingered. When the last team member had stepped out, Keanu spoke. "Come with me for a minute?" Eric turned, startled but nodded. He followed Keanu down a quiet hallway. They passed sleek doors, silent rooms, walls lined with framed quotes about progress, dignity, and design with purpose. At the end of the corridor, Keanu opened a door that led to a small corner lounge. Warm wood floors, a single window, and two armchairs facing each other with a small table between them. Keanu gestured to one. Eric sat, still gripping his notebook. Keanu didn't speak right away. He took a breath, leaned forward, and rested his elbows on his knees. "Do you know what we're really building here, Eric?" he asked. Eric shook his head. Keanu gave a half smile. "Not just innovation, not just technology. We're building reach. We're building tools that work in the places nobody pays attention to. Places where the sun bakes metal and power grids crash every other week. Where cool air and stable batteries aren't luxuries. They're lifelines." Eric nodded slowly. "I've lived in those places." "I know," Keanu said. "That's why I'm sitting here with you." Eric looked down. "I didn't expect any of this." Keanu leaned back. "We've been searching for people like you. People who think from the inside out, who design for survival because they've had to survive. Most engineers, they build in controlled labs. They think in perfect models. But your design came from sweat, from heat, from real-world constraint. And that makes it stronger." Eric was quiet. He'd never heard his work described like that. Keanu reached into his jacket and pulled out a small folder. He slid it across the table. "This is an official offer, full-time position, lead design consultant for a new initiative we're launching, Project Ember." Eric raised his eyebrows. "Project Ember?" "Yeah. Low-cost, scalable battery systems for high heat, low-engine regions. Everything from mobile solar storage to backup units for clinics, community cooling shelters, even schools. Your lattice system could be the key that unlocks all of it." Eric blinked hard. "You want me to lead that?" "Yes," Keanu said simply. He pointed to the folder. "It includes a starting salary, relocation support, and, this was important to me, flexible hours. You've got kids. You deserve to be around for them." Eric's hands trembled slightly as he opened the folder. It was all real. Numbers, contracts, terms, benefits, their lives. Not a miracle. A career. Eric swallowed hard. You don't even know me," he said. "Not really." Keanu looked at him. "I've seen enough to know who you are. I'm just..." Eric started to say something, then stopped himself. He let out a shaky breath. "I've been just surviving for so long, I don't even remember what it feels like to belong in a place like this." Keanu smiled gently. "You've always belonged. The world just hasn't made space for people like you to be heard." Eric looked back down at the folder. He ran his thumb across the page where his name was printed at the top. Not as a client, not as a charity case, as a lead. "Weigh me?" he asked, voice cracking. "Why stop for me at that gas station?" Keanu didn't hesitate. "Because sometimes the people with the best ideas are the ones no one's listening to." He leaned forward, eyes steady. "I just listened." Eric felt it in his chest like a rush of wind after a long breath held too long. "I've had people promise things before," he admitted. "Jobs that never called back. Grants I never qualified for. People who said they'd connect me to someone and disappeared after one email. I don't mean to be ungrateful. I'm just scared to believe it's real." Keanu nodded. "That makes sense. But this isn't a handout. It's a beginning. And the work still needs to be done." Eric looked up. "And you think I can do it?" "I think you've already done half of it," Keanu said. "Now you just need the right team around you to finish it." The room fell into a... Eric closed the folder and placed both hands on top of it. He didn't realize until now how tightly he'd been holding everything in. His failures, his regrets, his quiet hopes. All of it had been sitting on his shoulders, dragging him low. But here, in this room, someone had reached across and lifted a little of it. And suddenly, it wasn't unbearable anymore. He nodded slowly. "Okay." Keanu smiled. "Okay, I'm in," Eric said. "Whatever it takes." Keanu stood and extended his hand. "Welcome aboard, Eric." Eric stood too and shook it. This time, his hand was steady. They walked out of the room side by side. As they passed back through the hallway, Eric noticed how different the air felt. Or maybe it was just him. In the elevator down, Keanu glanced over. "You're going to need a passport soon." Eric laughed. "Now you're getting ahead of me." "You'll see," Keanu said. "Project Ember's just getting started, and I think your design's going places we haven't even imagined yet." The elevator dinged open. Eric stepped out into the lobby with the offer folder in one hand and his notebook in the other. But this time, he wasn't holding onto them for protection. He was holding onto them like they were tools. Because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't fixing broken things anymore. He was building something new. The late afternoon sun was hanging low over the rooftops as Eric turned onto his street. His truck glided over the pavement more smoothly than it had in years. The engine purred instead of wheezed. The air conditioning whispered cool air across his face. The new stereo, which he hadn't dared touch until now, quietly played a local radio station. The music felt like background to something bigger, something he could finally hear for the first time. He turned into the parking lot, past the old fence with its leaning posts and the rusted-out tricycles near the stairs. Everything looked the same, but something in him had shifted. When he parked, he sat for a moment, holding the folder Keanu had given him. It sat on the passenger seat, its edges perfectly square, its weight deceptively light for what it meant. He reached over, ran a hand across the top of it, and smiled. Then he stepped out of the truck and climbed the stairs two at a time. The front door opened before he could knock. Lila stood there, breathless, eyes wide. "You're home." Ben came flying out behind her, sock feet skidding on the tile. "Dad, did you do the interview? What happened? Did they like your ideas?" Eric opened his arms and both kids rushed into them. He hugged them tight, grounding himself in the weight of their small bodies, in the warmth of their trust. "They didn't just like it," he said softly, his voice catching. "They believed in it." Lila pulled back slightly. "What do you mean?" Eric looked between them. He took a breath. "We're moving," he said. Ben's mouth dropped open. "Moving where?" "To the coast," Eric said. "Near Santa Barbara. That's where the foundation has their lab. I'm going to be working there full-time, leading a project, one that helps families like ours get better power in places where it's too hot and too expensive to live comfortably." Lila blinked. "You mean, like, your design? Your idea?" Eric nodded. "My ceramic cooling system. They're going to build it, real prototypes, and I'm going to help lead the team." Ben gasped and grabbed Lila's hand. "He's going to be a real inventor." Lila looked at her dad like she was seeing him for the first time. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew you were still a genius." Eric smiled, his throat tightening. "I couldn't let you be wrong about that," he said. Ben looked around. "When are we going? Is it far? Will we have a house with stairs?" Eric laughed. "One thing at a time, buddy, but yes. We'll have more space, and you'll both have your own rooms." Lila grinned. "With real air conditioning?" Eric gave her a thumbs up, the kind that doesn't rattle every time you turn it on. Ben ran toward the kitchen. "I'm telling Mrs. Ramirez, and I'm grabbing the jar." Eric followed him, Lila at his side. Ben came back holding the old pickle jar, the label still crooked and faded. Dad's dream truck. He placed it carefully on the table like it was treasure. "We don't need this anymore," he said proudly. "You got your truck fixed and your job? We should call it something else." Lila tapped her chin, thinking, "What about Family Adventure Fund?" Eric raised an eyebrow. "Adventure Fund?" "Yeah," she said with a shrug. For wherever we go next, if we ever want to take a trip or buy something together, or maybe one day go to Disneyland. Ben lit up. Or space camp, huh? Eric knelt down beside the table and looked at the jar. It held maybe $5 in change, mostly pennies and nickels, but it felt full in a way no bank account ever had. He took a marker from the drawer and crossed out the old label. Then, in bold letters, wrote, Family Adventure Fund. Ben immediately shook the jar and grinned. We're gonna need more quarters. Eric stood, opened the fridge, and took out the orange juice they'd been rationing all week. He poured 3 glasses and raised his in a toast. 2 beginnings. They clinked their plastic cups together. The juice was warm, but none of them cared. Lila looked up after taking a sip. Are we leaving soon? Eric nodded. End of the week. The foundation sending movers. We'll pack what we need, and they'll take care of the rest. They've already lined up an apartment near the lab. 2 bedrooms, washer and dryer, and yes, central air. Ben whooped and did a spin. Lila leaned into her dad again. I'm kind of nervous. He hugged her close. Me too, but you know what? Well, that's how you know something big is starting. She didn't say anything for a second, then asked, Will you still have time for us? I mean, with work and everything? Eric pulled back just enough to look her in the eyes. Every night, every morning, every chance I get, this job. Keanu made sure it comes with flexible hours, because he knows my kids come first. Lila smiled, her eyes glassy. He's like a movie star with a heart. Eric nodded. Yeah, and he listens. Ben jumped up onto the couch and struck a superhero pose. We're moving to the ocean, and Dad's saving the world. Eric laughed and sat down beside him. No, he said. We're just helping fix it. 1 battery at a time. That night, as the sun dipped low and painted the apartment in gold, Eric packed away the first box. Lila labeled it in careful handwriting, Kitchen, Keep. Ben added a drawing of a rocket ship. Later, when they were brushing teeth and choosing clothes to pack for the trip, Eric caught sight of the notebook sitting on the coffee table. He picked it up and tucked it into his bag. Not because he needed to, but because it reminded him where the road had started and how far he'd come. The wind off the ocean carried the scent of salt and jasmine as it swept through the backyard of a small house tucked just 3 blocks from the beach. It was late afternoon, and the light had taken on that golden softness that only showed up near the coast. The sand-colored house, modest but bright, sat comfortably between neighbors, with wind chimes dancing softly near the porch. A dog barked in the distance, a gull called out above. In the backyard, Ben crouched near a solar tile panel, his hands covered in dirt. His small fingers tightened around a tiny spade, and he leaned forward, as if this single rectangle of energy-producing glass were the most important thing in the world. Line it up with the marker, Keanu said gently, squatting next to him. Ben adjusted the tile, his brow furrowed. Like this? Keanu nodded. Perfect. Are you sure this is going to make electricity? Keanu smiled. In the right light, with the right system, it'll help power your entire home. And maybe someone else's too. Ben looked up, eyes wide. So I'm kind of helping save the world, right? Exactly. They kept working together, sliding more tiles into place across a low wooden frame designed to hold them for testing. Nearby, boxes labeled Project Ember Project Experimental Hardware sat unopened, waiting for Monday's install. But today wasn't about work. It was about showing Ben how energy could come from the sun and how curiosity could turn into something real. Inside the house, Lila sat at the piano, her small fingers moving carefully across the keys. The upright piano had been a surprise gift from a woman at Eric's new job, who heard Lila humming a melody during a visit. It wasn't brand new and a few keys stuck, but Lila played it like it was a Steinway. Her music floated through the open window, blending with the breeze and the occasional shout from her brother outside. Eric stood at the kitchen counter, organizing folders for Monday's school talk. Next to him sat a half-empty cup of coffee, a printout of his most recent presentation slides, and a sticky note Lila had left that morning. "Don't forget to show them the honeycomb drawing. That's the coolest part." He smiled at it, then reached into the nearby drawer. Inside, tucked neatly between rubber bands and envelopes, was a small frame. In it sat the napkin sketch, creased, yellowing, but protected. It was the same one he'd drawn on with Keanu that night at the gas station. The rough outline of the thermal core sat beside a quick note in Keanu's handwriting. "Ceramic taper equals game changer?" Eric stared at it for a moment, then closed the drawer. He liked keeping it nearby, not because he needed the reminder, but because it anchored him. 6 months ago, that napkin had held a dream. Now it was holding history. Later that evening, Eric walked down the hall and peeked into Lila's room. She sat cross-legged on her bed, headphones in, sketching something in her notebook. The walls were covered in magazine cutouts, quotes, and a picture of a solar-powered greenhouse she'd found online. Next to her desk was a science fair ribbon. "3rd place." "You good?" Eric asked. Lila pulled her headphones off. "Yeah. Just working on something for school." He stepped inside. "Need help?" She smiled. "Not yet." Eric nodded and turned to leave, but then stopped. "Hey, thanks for believing in me." Lila blinked, caught off guard. "Dad?" "I mean it," he said. "There were days I was holding on with a thread, and then I'd look at you and Ben and think, I can't let them see me give up." Lila's voice was soft. "You never did. Not once." He leaned down and kissed her head, then headed back down the hall. Ben was asleep already, curled sideways in his bed, clutching a pillow shaped like a spaceship. Beside his bed was a new jar. This one was labeled in crooked letters. "Family Adventure Fund, Level 2. Eric chuckled. He dimmed the lamp and pulled the blanket over Ben's feet. Then he stepped outside to the back porch. Keanu was still there, sitting with a bottle of water in hand, his motorcycle helmet resting beside him on the step. Eric sat beside him. "Thanks again for coming," Eric said. Keanu looked up at the sky. "I told you I'd check in once the panels were ready. You always keep your word, don't you?" Keanu shrugged. "I try." They sat for a long moment, listening to the wind, the rustle of leaves, the soft clink of the wind chimes. Eric broke the silence. "I still don't know why you stopped that night." Keanu didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Because I saw a man sitting on a curb who reminded me of someone I used to be." Eric waited. Keanu continued, "Someone who had more ideas than chances. And I thought, maybe the world doesn't need more COOs right now. Maybe it needs more fathers who build things quietly, in the dark." Eric nodded slowly, feeling the truth of that. "You think we're making a difference?" "I think you already have," Keanu said. They sat together a few minutes more. Then Keanu stood and picked up his helmet. "I'll be back next month. We'll check the output readings on the new units." Eric smiled. Looking forward to it. Keanu started toward his bike, then turned. "Oh, and that napkin sketch?" "Yeah." Keanu grinned. "I want it back someday. Might be worth something." Eric laughed as the engine started and Keanu pulled away into the night. Back inside, the house was still, peaceful, lived in. Lila's piano notes had faded into quiet, and Ben snored softly in his bed. Eric walked to the kitchen, opened the drawer, and took out the frame again. He placed it on the wall above the kitchen table, right where the family would see it every morning. A napkin, a sketch, a start, and a reminder that even the smallest ideas, if someone listens, can light up the world. It was Sunday morning when Lila sat at the kitchen table with a fresh sheet of paper, a set of colored pencils, and her favorite gel pen. The sunlight streamed through the window beside her, catching on the jar labeled Family Adventure Fund, Level 2. The piano sat silent for now, Ben was still asleep, and her dad was out front working on a small DIY shelf for their hallway. She pulled her long brown hair into a ponytail and leaned forward, the tip of her pencil pressed against her bottom lip as she thought. Then, carefully, she began to draw. The card was small, folded once, down the middle. On the front, she drew her family, standing in front of their new house, the sand-colored beach cottage with the big sky behind it. Her dad had one arm around her shoulders, the other resting on Ben's head. There was a solar panel mounted on the roof and a small swing set in the corner of the yard. Behind them, she sketched a motorcycle and a tall man in a black t-shirt waving from beside it. She colored in his beard with gray and dark brown strokes. It wasn't perfect, but she wanted it to look like him. Inside the card, in her neatest handwriting, she wrote, "Dear Mr. Keanu, thank you for helping my dad believe in himself again. You didn't just help him get a job. You helped him remember that his ideas mattered. You helped him remember he's smart. I always knew that, but now he knows it too. And now he smiles more. He even whistles when he's making breakfast. I think people like you are rare. Not because you're famous, but because you see people that other people walk past. That night at the gas station, you saw my dad, and you listened. That's a big thing. Thank you for being kind and for being real." For Lila Dawson. P.S. Ben says thank you too. He says you're cooler than Iron Man. She drew a tiny lightning bolt and a sun in the corner, then folded the card carefully and slipped it into a plain white envelope. She sealed it and wrote, "Mr. Keanu Reeves," across the front in looping cursive. She knew the foundation's return address from the welcome letter they'd received after the move. She stood on her tiptoes to grab a stamp from the drawer, pressed it in place, and walked it to the mailbox. As she slid it in and closed the flap, she whispered quietly, "Thank you." Then she turned and ran back toward the house, the wind catching the edge of her hoodie, her sneakers light on the path. Inside, her father had just come in with sawdust on his sleeves and a pencil behind his ear. He raised an eyebrow. "Where were you?" "Mailing something," Lila said with a small smile. He didn't press. He just smiled back and nodded. 3 days later, on the other side of the state, a trailer sat tucked behind a film set nestled in the dry hills above Santa Clarita. Cameras were being repositioned, crew members moved quietly with headsets, and somewhere off to the side, a fight scene was being rehearsed with padded mats and safety harnesses. Inside the trailer, Keanu sat alone for a brief break between takes. He wore a scuffed leather jacket for the role, his knuckles painted with fake bruises and grit. A script sat open on the table in front of him, but his eyes weren't on it. They were on the envelope. He had arrived that morning, slipped into the small pile of forwarded mail his assistant handed him with a shrug. He'd opened it while waiting for the lighting team to finish a rig. Now, the card lay flat on the table. He read the words again, slowly, silently. "Thank you for helping my dad believe in himself again." He didn't smile. Not exactly. But the corners of his eyes softened, and something in his chest let go of the weight it didn't realize it had been holding. He ran his fingers across the bottom of the card where Lila had drawn him in crayon, his figure beside the motorcycle, next to a happy family standing in front of their house. The sun in the sky had little lines shooting out from it. A small swing set sat to the side. And just beneath the drawing, written in smaller text, were Ben's words, "You're cooler than Iron Man." Keanu chuckled under his breath. He folded the card slowly, creasing the edge like it was made of gold leaf instead of paper, then reached for his wallet. It was worn brown leather, scratched along the seams, and already overstuffed with receipts and notes. He slid the card inside, tucked carefully behind a picture of his late friend River, and closed the wallet with both hands. Then he sat for a moment longer. The knock on the trailer door was soft. "Mr. Reeves," a voice called, "they're ready for you on set." Keanu stood, grabbed his helmet from the hook, and nodded toward the door. "Comin'." But just before he left, he paused at the mirror by the door. He didn't adjust his jacket or fix his hair. He just looked at his reflection and let the words settle again. You saw my dad. And you listened. That's a big thing." He gave a slow nod, then stepped outside into the light. As he crossed the gravel lot back to set, the envelope already faded into the background of the world around him. But the message stayed. Somewhere, a man who once sat on a gas station curb now designed cooling systems that could power a clinic. Somewhere, 2 kids were drawing pictures of the future instead of wishing for it. And somewhere inside his jacket, that thank you note reminded him why it all mattered. The cameras rolled again, but off-screen something real had already happened. The house was quiet, wrapped in the gentle hush that only came after a day well spent. Outside, the ocean breathed in long, slow waves that kissed the sand with steady rhythm. The light was golden and soft, stretching across the living room floor like a blanket. Eric stood by the window, one hand resting on the wooden frame, the other holding a warm mug of tea. The steam rose toward his face, curling like a slow question. He watched the sun inch toward the horizon. The sky was streaked with colors: lavender, amber, soft pink. The kind of sunset that made everything seem possible. Below the window, he could hear Ben giggling from the hallway as Lila chased him with a handful of popcorn. Somewhere behind them, a song played from the radio, something slow and old, filled with harmonies and time. Eric closed his eyes. For a second, he let himself feel it all. The peace, the relief, the still flickering awe that this was real. 6 months ago, he'd stood under the buzzing lights of a rundown gas station, wondering how to explain failure to his kids. Now, there were mornings he woke before dawn just to sit on the back porch and remind himself that none of this was a dream. He looked down at the table beside him. His old notebook rested there, closed but always nearby. Next to it was a new one, clean pages, untouched. He'd bought it last week, not because he needed it right away, but because he wanted to have a place for the next idea, the next problem worth solving. On the wall above the table hung the framed napkin sketch. 2 sets of handwriting, one from a man who'd been exhausted and broken, the other from someone who had seen through all of that and said, "I believe in you." He looked back out at the waves and whispered quietly to the glass, "We were never broken. We just needed someone to believe." The words didn't come with fanfare. They weren't meant to. But in the stillness of that moment, they felt truer than anything else he'd ever spoken. From the hallway, footsteps approached. Lila popped her head into the living room. "Dad? We're making s'mores outside. You coming?" Eric smiled. "Wouldn't miss it." She disappeared, and he set the mug down. Before walking away from the window, he glanced once more at the ocean, the sky, the light now slipping away like the last line of a chapter. And he felt ready for the next one. As Eric stepped onto the back patio, the warm smell of melting marshmallow greeted him. Ben was already laughing with chocolate on his chin, waving a half-burnt stick in the air like a torch. Lila rolled her eyes and handed her dad a plate. "Your turn," she said. "Don't let him convince you that black marshmallows are the best." Eric took a seat and skewered one slowly, holding it just above the fire. They talked about nothing and everything. School, a new idea for a solar-powered toy Ben wanted to build. Lila's friend who asked if her dad was the scientist guy with the beach house. They laughed, passed around graham crackers, and sang the wrong lyrics to old songs. At one point, Eric looked across the yard at the solar tiles they'd finished installing last week. They were gleaming in the moonlight, waiting for the next sunrise to do their quiet work. Powering homes, stabilizing clinics, fueling futures. It hit him how many people had been helped already. The pilot program through Project Ember had launched last month. 15 families across the desert regions of California and Arizona now had access to backup power. No more fridge meltdowns in 100-degree heat. No more nights spent sweating in silence. And more were on the way. It hadn't happened with noise or applause. It had happened with listening, with building, with one stranger stopping to ask a question instead of walking by. He looked at his kids. Lila's eyes danced in the firelight. She was talking about a science competition her teacher had just announced. Ben was already yawning, head leaning slightly against his dad's arm, his marshmallow forgotten. Eric knew the world hadn't suddenly become perfect. Bills still came, there were still hard days. But now there was movement, progress, purpose, and, most importantly, belief. Belief that quiet voices mattered, that small designs could lead to giant change, that broken trucks didn't mean broken men, that a single moment of being seen could unlock everything. After the kids went to bed, Eric walked back to the kitchen to rinse their mugs. He stood at the sink a moment longer than necessary, then dried his hands and picked up a pen from the counter. He walked back to the table and opened the new notebook. On the first page, he wrote one sentence: "There is no such thing as small hope." He underlined it once, closed the book, and turned off the light. Now it's your turn. Have you ever had someone believe in you at your lowest? Was it a teacher, a friend, a stranger, someone who saw what the world didn't? Tell us in the comments below. Because sometimes all it takes is one person to say, "I see you, I believe in you," and everything changes. If you believe second chances can change lives, hit that like button and share this story. Someone you know might need it more than you realize. Until next time, remember, you are never too small to be seen, and never too lost to be found.